I only labor for money or out of spite, and I spite labored on this one for a solid 2 or 3 weeks to bring justice to RC5 owners. And you know what? My RC5 can overdub via MIDI now, and so can yours if you follow the instructions in this tutorial. So welcome to my retro future, or perhaps I should call it my void warranty, because that is exactly what we're going to be doing today with this little red spite factory. Fire up the soldering iron, gang. We're fixing what's wrong with the Boss RC5.
Hello, my name is Wesley, and this guitar pedal here is called the RC5. It's a looper station by a company called Boss, and it's a pretty simple device in theory. You just tap the button, audio goes in, and you make a loop. You tap it again to finish recording, and then by tapping the button more times you can overdub additional layers on top of it. Unfortunately, I have some beef with this product because I feel like there's a bit of a bait and switch going on, so I'm going to be making some clever modifications to make this guitar pedal do everything that I think it should. Essentially what's going on here is that there are two additional products in this product line that are even bigger and fancier and more expensive and have more features. And there are certain really basic features that have been disabled in the software that runs on this pedal to make those more expensive options seem more attractive. So, to fix what needs fixing here, I've created a special circuit that lives inside the battery compartment of the RC5. Now, the RC5 is able to run on a 9-volt battery, but it can drain it in like 2 hours anyway, so I imagine the overwhelming majority of users are going to be using this DC 9-volt power connector here to power it externally. So that's what I'm going to be doing with mine, and then my little special circuit here just taps into the same power that the guitar pedal is already receiving. It's also going to be tapping into this MIDI input right here. So this is a little data connection that gives the guitar pedal instructions on what to do. My circuit is going to listen to those instructions, and last but not least, it's going to act on those instructions by actuating this button right here. So it doesn't physically move the button, but the guitar pedal knows the button is being pressed when the two contacts inside it get shorted together, and it's detecting whether or not it's being connected to ground. So I can pull the sensor pin low to ground and spoof a fake button press through the transistors that are on here that are being controlled from the little microcontroller in this circuit. So what is this missing functionality that I'm trying to address with this modification? Well, it's overdubbing. One of the simplest, most powerful, most important things that you want a looper station to be able to do. This unit is relegated to only being able to activate an overdub using the main switch, which makes it severely limited in its usefulness in a guitar pedal rig like mine that relies on all the signals coming through this MIDI data connection. This MIDI data connection activates, deactivates, sends new instructions to all the pedals on my guitar pedal board, so I can do everything with just one button press rather than tap dancing all over everything. There's a lot of pros and cons to this setup, but the fact is, a luxury model at this price point should be able to execute its most basic functions using MIDI. A bare bones illustration of the issue at hand here, I'm using a station down here that manages all my pedals via MIDI messages, right? So the factory version of the pedal, I could record a loop, and I could play over it, but I couldn't make any additional layers. But now with the mod circuit, obviously that's not a great example, but the point is you can do it. So keep in mind that the missing functionality is totally available on this pedal. You can do what you need to do using this main switch or the auxiliary button port. You just can't do it with MIDI. That's why my device listens to the incoming MIDI connection for certain messages that I've programmed it to listen for, and then spoofs those fake button presses in here so that it can still do things that are relegated only to the physical buttons, but do them over MIDI. I hope that makes sense. This little auxiliary button port here is also used by my circuit. Since this thing is a pretty complicated device and it's only just got the one main button on it, you can add more buttons to it by connecting a stereo 1/4-inch cable into here and then running that over to like one of Boss's special little button expander boxes. But what I'm going to do is use this little dummy plug that goes in there so that the guitar pedal knows that there's something in there and it won't ignore the inputs, and I've just wired the connections internally to my little mod circuit so that I can pull those connections to ground and make the guitar pedal think that the auxiliary button ports are being used. I gotta say, I'm a little bit proud of this one because it doesn't actually interfere with the function of the pedal at all. You can still use the main switch or the aux button ports or anything, and this will just give you functionality in addition to that. It won't take away the function of the physical buttons. Now, if you don't really use MIDI in your guitar pedal rig, then there's not a ton of reason for you to do this mod. It only affects MIDI users. But the thing is, for $200, if you're not using MIDI and you're just going to manually step on it to make stuff happen, there are other options that are way cheaper. So this product really is targeted at people who have MIDI implementation on their boards, and then they intentionally nerfed that functionality in a way that's really hard to notice until you get the unit in your hands, and then say, oh, if you want that, you gotta buy the more expensive RC50 or the RC500 or whatever. Or is it RC10? And yes, I have confirmed this with Boss customer support. This pedal cannot overdub via MIDI, and the more expensive ones can.
This move is petty and ridiculous, but one thing they didn't count on is that there's no force on earth more petty and ridiculous than me. I developed the code, the circuit, the strip board layout, and even a custom circuit board for this project, and it's all totally free and open source on my GitHub page, link in the description. Everything you need for this project is pretty damn cheap, especially if you have any kind of DIY electronic stuff already laying around. So how exactly does this mod work? The RC5 knows that one of the buttons is being pressed when the connection is shorted to ground, and normally that's done in a physical, mechanical way. The thing is, I can also pull those connections to ground using a simple 2N3904 transistor, which can be had for literally pennies, and I can control that transistor using a microcontroller, such as an Arduino, or in my case, an ATtiny85. It's small, it's cheap, it barely needs any power, and these things can be had anywhere that hobby electronic stuff is sold. We'll use 3 transistors because there are 3 switches for us to hack. Now, with this microcontroller and these transistors, we have a way to spoof button presses into the buttons that normally would have to be mechanically actuated. But we still have some problems left to solve. How does our ATtiny85 know when to send those pulses? Well, the RC5 already has a MIDI input on it, so we're going to tap into that existing connector and passively split it off into a separate MIDI input circuit that will connect the ATtiny85 to. No need for an extra connection, we're just going to be listening to the same data that the RC5 is already receiving. So for that, we're going to need a 6N138 optical isolator, a cheap and easily sourced jelly bean that allows for a noiseless data connection. The MIDI standard doesn't recommend a passive split of one MIDI data line into 2 separate optical isolators, but generally you can get away with one passive split before you start having reliability problems. Just make sure that your MIDI distribution system has separately buffered outputs and that this connection doesn't have any other passive splits on it, and you should be fine. Mine's been perfectly consistent so far. Worth noting that MIDI signals can come in either 3.3 volts or 5 volts. My system uses 5 volts, and I suspect that that might be helping the split connection stay reliable. So now we have data going to our circuit and a microcontroller that can spoof button presses by bypassing Boss's little cash grab. But this circuit still needs power and a place to live. Thankfully, the RC5 has us covered on both counts. This pedal has a battery compartment that houses a standard 9-volt battery. This means that we not only have access to a 9-volt line and a ground connection through the empty battery harness, but we also have a little rectangular home for our circuit to live in. That's most of our problems solved, but 9 volts would be enough to fry our ATtiny85 and our optical isolator. Enter the L78L05 voltage regulator, which takes that 9 volts and regulates it down to 5 volts, which is well within tolerances for the components we're using. Sprinkle resistors and capacitors to taste. There's also a diode and an LED in there, which is an indicator that flashes every time the ATtiny85 hears a message that it's listening for. That's our physical circuit done. The full schematic layout diagram is on GitHub. The capacitor values just need to be in the ballpark, but the resistors are a little more crucial that you use the right value. Stick to the provided part numbers on everything else and you should be fine. So in theory, this circuit can do what we need, but there's just one problem: software. We gotta write some code that runs on this thing. Maker types among you might be thinking, hey, you can program an ATtiny85 using the Arduino IDE, and there's already a whole library for dealing with MIDI. The code will be easy peasy, just like if MIDI read dot equals whatever message you want, parentheses do thing, else do nothing. Great. The problem is that library depends on the presence of a hardware UART that the ATtiny does not have. That means we gotta manually parse each and every 0 and 1 that comes down the wire using software serial, a process that some people refer to as bit banging. I did not invent the term. Anyway, we gotta write some robust code that won't glitch out when our desired data packets are interspersed with real-time clock messages and sysx messages and every other bit of random digital detritus that might come down that MIDI connection. I got real cozy and read up on the MIDI protocol for this, and I sat down for a little convo with man's new best friend, ChatGPT, which Quickly helped me develop a giant pile of spaghetti that kind of worked sometimes but was never going to be robust enough to not periodically shit the bed. So after that, I scheduled a video call with my brother, a professional software engineer who spent like 6 hours disabusing me of all the dumb stuff I thought I knew and teaching me how to tackle the problem sensibly. I moved my project over to VS Code, which is a million times more user-friendly than the default Arduino IDE. Ben, thank you for the save, bro. Appreciate you, man. Now my code can handle any weird messages I stress test it with. There does eventually come a point where I can flood the line with so many junk messages that the ATtiny85 just can't keep up, but I don't think I'll reach that threshold under normal usages. You'll need to configure the software by telling it which MIDI channel to listen to. Just set the MIDI channel on the RC5 to whatever you want, and then go into the Arduino IDE before uploading your code to the ATtiny85 and redefine the MIDI CH variable to whatever channel you have on the RC5. The RC5 comes hard-coded to listen to MIDI CC numbers 80 through 87, and you can define an action that occurs when any of those messages are received. My device is set to listen to CC numbers 88 through 90, and it's listening for a value of 0. You can tell the pedal what to do when it hears those messages by defining the desired action for the main, Control 1, and Control 2 buttons in the RC5's menu system. You can change that stuff by editing the variables in code, but it's probably best to just choose your MIDI channel and leave everything else alone. Great! So now we have a circuit that can electrically do whatever we want, connected to a brain that knows how and when to do what we want. Just one thing left. We need to connect all the various inputs and outputs to their respective places inside the RC5. It's not a crazy hard mod, but it'll take a little patience and a little know-how. Thankfully, I've done the initial trial and error for you. Let's start with power. Like I said before, we'll get our power directly from the battery harness wires. Only thing is, the designers of the pedal need to prevent a scenario wherein the pedal is getting juice from both the battery and an external power supply, because that would fry stuff. That's why the power plug has a mechanical switch in it that breaks the power connection to the battery harness when an external power supply is plugged in. We're going to use a spare bit of copper wire to nullify that switch and leave the battery harness connected to the power system at all times. We can see that these 2 points here are normally connected, right? But if I take a power plug and plug it in there, they no longer are connected. And this right here, where is it? Is plugged into the positive terminal on the battery harness. So if I get one of these over here, you can see that it's connected but not to there, right? Because it doesn't want the battery and power to be connected at the same time. So what I'm going to do is make it so that that connection never breaks, and that way we get power to the battery compartment when there's power to the pedal. Okay. Now we can use that battery harness connection for the opposite of its intended purpose, to provide power to the battery compartment rather than receiving power from it. We've got our little prototype board here running decently well. We're going to start modifying the pedal to get it like moved into where it needs to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is take these strands of thin 28 gauge wire and start looping them through the battery compartment. So we've already got this thing pulled apart a little bit. So you can see right here is kind of where I want it all to go. Yeah, alright, I think we're gonna have to clip this thing. You can see there's like a little tab right here. We're gonna need to get rid of it so we can make room for all these wires. All it does is hold this thing in place, which I don't think is like strictly necessary, so. Alright, not sure how well you can see that, but this little tab has been removed. And that allows us to stuff more wires through. There we go. So now we've got 5 leads going from inside the battery compartment to outside. And that is going to allow us to get the 2 pins for MIDI, the 2 pins for the aux tip and ring, and then the one for the main switch, which is great. Leave plenty hanging out on both sides so that you only ever need to trim them shorter rather than trying to splice them longer. Next are the solder lugs for control 1 and control 2, which are a bit more buried in the pedal's guts. And what we are going to do is begin by identifying our various contact points. So this is the little auxiliary switch right here. So I'm going to look inside there to figure out which one is the tip, because I have indicated that the aux tip is going to be white. I've got a cable in there, and I'm going to put one end of my continuity tester on the tip, and I'm just going to poke around until I find it. And I looked before, so I think I can see. Alrighty. I thought I knew. Oh. Alright. So there's a little green wire in there. I hope you can see it. Pointed right at it there. But that is what we want to solder to. And it's also right there on that bigger lug, so I might just go ahead and go towards the larger lug. So we'll just yoink. Got an extra set of hands here. I think this is going to be my only way of accomplishing this. Alright, so next we're going to want to get the aux ring, which is going to be our yellow wire. So, once again, taking my continuity tester, and I'm going to grab the ring on this little wire that I have plugged into the aux port, and that'll be what I test one end and the other end. Nice. Out of curiosity, what's the... Okay, so yep, that other big pad right there. That's what we want. The 28 gauge setting there. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. Great. Oh yeah, that's that burninating silicon. Let's talk about the MIDI data connection. This little headphone plug looking thing here has the 2 connectors that we need for our MIDI input. Thankfully, we have 2 juicy solder lugs that we can tap into to split that signal off and listen in. Next up is the main switch, conveniently located down here on this smaller but still doable solder point on the main board. I recommend sticking to my suggested color coding so that you can just follow along with the photos in this guide. You'll need very thin wire to sneak onto this main circuit board and have all the cables snake into the battery compartment, around everything and through the enclosure. I used 28 gauge stranded core wire with very flexible silicone sleeving on it, and that worked great for me. You could maybe go thinner, but don't go any thicker or it won't fit. Once we have all 5 of those cables connected where they need to go on the pedal's guts, we can put the circuit board back in place while gently pulling the other ends of those wires in through the battery compartment to take up any slack. With the back cover screwed back into place, we now just need to trim our wires to length and solder them to the mod board. If you've been using the same colors as me, just use this reference photo to see where each of the wires needs to go. Once that's all set, you can very carefully snip the battery harness off and connect the red wire to the 9-volt input and the black wire to ground. Now you just need to fix the mod circuit in place inside the battery compartment using whatever your favorite form of double-sided adhesive strip is. Nicely done. Now the hardware aspect of this project is complete. Now you need to use whatever your preferred method is to upload code onto the ATtiny85. There are lots of cheap purpose-built boards specifically for that purpose that you can find on Amazon or SparkFun, or you can use a repurposed Arduino Uno. I'll be doing that here. There are no libraries needed for this project, but there is a software dependency for something called a core, which allows the Arduino IDE to program the ATtiny85. I'm not clear on all the details, really. Someone smarter than me has come up with it, but you're going to want to go to File, Preferences, and then here in this additional Boards Manager URLs, you're going to paste in this link, which you can find in the README file of my GitHub page. We're going to click OK, and now that allows us to access what we need from the Boards Manager. So we're going to go to Tools, Boards Manager. Whoopsie, excuse me, I guess we're already there.
boards manager, and now we can type in ATtiny85, and we're going to see this ATtiny thing here by David A. Mellis. Thank you very much, David. We're going to click install, and that's going to happen really fast because there's really not that much there. And now that allows us to go into tools, go into board, and then there's this ATtiny option. We're going to click 25, 45, 85. And then from there, we'll be able to configure everything we need.
Make sure to install the bootloader on the ATtiny85 and configure the fuses as shown in this picture. Make sure you're on 16 MHz speed or you'll have reliability problems. Also make sure to set the MIDI channel at this step. With the code uploaded and the mod circuit installed in the pedal, congratulations, your RC5 can now officially overdub via MIDI.
So after you've successfully installed the mod circuit in the RC5, it's really easy to do the setup. So this little setup button here takes us from the default menu to the setup menu. I'm going to scroll past general and go to MIDI. So earlier when we were programming the mod circuit in the Arduino IDE, we chose channel number 9. So I'm just going to also choose number 9 here on the looper station so that the guitar pedal itself and the mod circuit within it are both listening to channel 9, but you can change that to whatever you want. Usually I switch Omni to off because I don't want it to be listening to messages on other channels that are meant for other pedals. So if I press setup again, we're going to get back to the main setup menu, and I'm going to scroll to control. So when you're setting up stuff to happen over MIDI, it's going to be MIDI CC numbers 80 through 87. And you can pick all the stuff. There's like descriptions in the instruction manual of what all these options do. But of course, like I said, the overdub function is not available on any of these MIDI CC numbers. So I've set up the main button, which is here, pedal function. Now through the use of our mod circuit, whatever is assigned to pedal function is also going to happen when it receives MIDI CC number 80. So I've set the main button to track RPSC. That's the like main sort of record / overdub multiple function thingy. And then control 1 func and control 2 function represent the extra buttons that can be plugged into the little auxiliary button port. And since we have a dummy plug in there and our mod circuit is connected to those pins, we're able to spoof button presses into those too.
I have not yet implemented the momentary switch functionality, but if people ask for it, I would consider it.
Okay, so just real quick, I'm going to show you how to order the custom PCB through any website. I'm using JLC PCB here. They're cheap and the quality is good as far as I can tell, but there's lots of other services. I'm not sponsored by them in any way. But basically you just need to set up an account, which I'm not going to go over here because that should be pretty easy. You can just click on 2 layers and then click on instant quote from their main landing page and then add Gerber file. So this zip file is all you need, and that'll be available on my GitHub page. You don't need any of these. Those are just what is inside the zip file. So I'm going to take this, just drag it and drop it directly onto add Gerber file. And it should upload pretty fast. And then you can see what the board looks like. It should look something like this. You can tell it's a little different from the one that I made because I did a new version of it for y'all to fix a couple of minor issues. You can go to the Gerber viewer and click on 3D and kind of have a look around, which is pretty cool. So there's no vias or anything here, so it should be very cheap. Alright, so base material should be FR4. You don't need to worry about any of this stuff. 2 layers, the dimensions are filled in automatically. Mine was a little bit wide and I had to file it down, but don't worry, I made this one skinnier for the rest of y'all. And then literally just leave everything as a default. 1.6 millimeters is fine. You can change the color of the PCB if you want. I think it maybe adds a couple cents or something. But everything else, just leave it on default and you should be good. So if I click Save to Cart, you can see that the shipping estimate is actually a lot more than the boards themselves. They're only $2. So if you find someone in the US, you'll probably pay a little bit more for getting the boards made, but the shipping will maybe be less, so I'll leave that to you to like price compare, but it is really pretty affordable. I mean, sub $20 for 5 custom PCBs because that is the minimum quantity. And then, mod your friends' pedals, I guess. And the bill of materials for all this should be, I want to say, under $10, so I think you can probably do this upgrade for like under $30. Well, now that all the hard work's out of the way, let's take her for a test drive and see what she can do.
I don't really plan on selling these, and I've made everything open source for people to make their own, but if there's a huge uptick in interest from people who are willing to install them but don't know how to like populate and program the board, maybe we can figure something out. I guess comment below if that's something you're interested in, and I'll evaluate if it seems worthwhile to try and do a small run. Well, this is quite a lot of spite labor to put into a seemingly small upgrade, but it takes the pedal from being pretty useless in a MIDI pedal board to being pretty damn useful, and with no externally visible changes. I'm pretty happy with how this worked out. Sadly, I forgot a resistor on my initial draft of the board, so I fixed that issue and made some other minor changes to the version that's going on GitHub, so yours will look a little different than mine. If you've decided to make one of these, your version should be good to go. Also, this circuit and code can be very easily used to add MIDI functionality to any pedal that has buttons that operate by being shorted to ground, such as a JHS tap tempo, for example. So I'm interested to see if any other fun uses for this mod circuit present themselves. If you want to see other instrument builds, repairs, mods, original music, and occasional spite labor, please send an angrily worded customer support ticket to that subscribe button. Thanks a million for watching. Goodbye.